is a panel session that looks at Africa, old challenges that require new solutions. Our panelists for this particular session will be David Blumberg, Chief Executive Officer of Blumberg Grain USA. David serves as the CEO of the West African Division, and he was previously with Deloitte Consulting. He has advised Fortune 200 clients across finance, healthcare, technology sectors on issues ranging from marketing to mergers and acquisition. David holds certifications from LEED and is a graduate of the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, and he was inducted in the Order of Golden Fleece, the university's oldest and highest honorary society. We are also joined by Sanjay Sethi, Managing Director and CEO of Signature Agri Ventures Africa. Sanjay was recognized for his noteworthy contributions to improve agribusiness and food security situation in countries in Africa, and he won the prestigious the Africa Food Prize 2013 award. This is an amazing achievement, and it was in Kampala, Uganda. He is the CEO of the Food and Beverages of Export Trading Group. Sanjay is an expert in international relations and has developed farmlands and identified right investment opportunities for agribusiness in Africa and Asia. His advice has been tremendously useful and helpful to African countries to fine-tune their blueprints for agriculture. Sanjay has implemented various end-to-end supply chain integration projects. He implemented modern irrigation projects in various African countries. He undertook many infrastructure projects like setting up India's first mega food park and India's first free trade warehousing zone and India's first private model terminal market. We are also joined by Dr. Balqis Osman Al-Shah, who is a climate change expert from African Development Bank. Dr. Balqis is a climate change expert at the Compliance and Safeguards Division at the African Development Bank. She has more than 17 years of experience in different climate change issues with special focus on vulnerability and adaptation assessment related to African countries and Arab region. Her research focuses on human dimension of global environmental changes and implications on sustainable development. She has served as a lead author in a number of IPCC assessment reports and is a guest editor in a number of scientific journals and has reviewed a number of scientific papers and has published in highly reputable journals. She is the winner of the UN EP Champions of the Earth Award to Outstanding Environmentalists. She is a winner of the highest achievement medal by the government of Sudan in 2011 and the Nobel Prize winners 2007. Our final panelist is Dr. Saad Khalil, Director General, King Abdul Initiative for Agriculture and Investment Abroad, Advisor, Minister of Agriculture, Riyadh, Acting Secretary General, Saudi Organic Farming Association. Dr. Saad is a Director of the King Abdul Initiative for Agriculture. As I mentioned, previously he was the Vice CEO of Al-Waji International for Agricultural Investment, supervising, coordinating all agricultural projects in Sudan, Egypt, Ukraine, and Saudi Arabia. Prior to this, he worked with Watania Agricultural Company, a member of the National WTO technical team during the accession of Saudi Arabia to WTO membership, and an economic advisor to His Excellency, the Minister of Agriculture. We're extremely privileged and pleased to have our panelists. May I ask them to join the platform, please? As in the previous session, I'll start off with some questions, and then, depending on time, we'll see if we can take some questions from the audience as well. This morning, we learned a number of things about food security. The root cause of food insecurity in developing countries is the inability of people to gain access to food due to poverty. While the rest of the world has made significant progress towards poverty alleviation, Africa in particular, and sub-Saharan Africa, continues to lag behind. Projections show that many that there will be an increase in this tendency unless preventative measures are taken. Many factors have contributed to this tendency: AIDS, civil war, poor governance, frequent drought, climate change, etc. Food security on the continent has worsened since 1970, and the proportion of malnutrition has remained at 1/3 of the population. And if we look at the projections of Africa reaching 1.8 billion by 2050, we're talking about 1/3 of that population being malnutritioned, right? Africa is large, okay? Now, the question for us really, or the question I'd like to start off with, is with more than 1 in 4 Africans being unnourished, according to a recent UN report, 90% of the food in sub-Saharan Africa is grown under rain-fed agriculture. Food production in the region has become vulnerable to changes in weather conditions. Environmental change brought about by altered weather patterns has a potential to seriously impact on food security, especially in Africa's most vulnerable states. And of course, Sub-Sahara being the bulk of this. What do you feel, and I'd like to pose this question to Dr. Bilquis, what do you feel is the real scale of this problem, and how can African countries react to this challenge, bearing in mind the limitations of finance and capacity, etc.?
Good morning. Thank you. Actually, the issue of climate change had recently been mentioned in the fifth IPCC assessment report, the working group 1, the science of climate change, which shows the very, very gloomy picture, actually. And it indicated that it's, the significance, the confidence level that climate change is human-induced is more than 95% now. It shows that also the rising temperature over the 3 last decades is unprecedented. And as we know from previous assessment that Africa is the most vulnerable continent to the impacts of climate change, we expect now more impacts. And the problem of Africa is not only because of climate change. Africa has many, many factors that contribute to its vulnerability, what we can call the multiple stresses. And for Africa, adaptation remains a priority. But adaptation needs resources, which is currently lacking in Africa. If we are speaking about food security, we understand that climate change will affect the different dimensions of food security in Africa, particularly production, distribution also, and a continent which is with more than 70% in sub-Saharan Africa under the poverty line. And we know poverty is a major contributor to food insecurity. It's going to face more pressures in terms of its agricultural production, pastures, water resources, energy, of course, problems associated with human health. The challenges are very great. As I mentioned, it is not only a climate change. Climate change is going to aggravate existing problems. I think one of the major factors for food insecurity in Africa is violent conflicts, which lead to displacement of large populations, movement from rural to urban areas. And we usually don't speak about the urban poverty or urban food insecurity, but it is growing in Africa with growing cities, especially the movement from rural production sites in the rural areas to the urban centers, which it has dual impacts. First, neglecting the agriculture and bringing more problems to the urban centers, and facing also many challenges: social disintegration, diseases, failing infrastructure, getting exposed to more problems, climatic or non-climatic. I forgot to mention that another IPCC report, which is on managing extreme climate, has also been published and last year, and it indicates that we are going to face more extreme climate under climate change, extreme conditions like drought, floods, thunderstorms, hurricanes are going to increase in terms of intensity, in terms of frequency, in terms of duration. And of course, Africa's share will be large, we know. It's not only drought, floods also, flash floods, which can be more devastating than drought. So all these problems in a situation which is already gloomy, we can imagine the future for Africa.
The picture looks very bleak.
Yes, and we need serious actions. We need actions in terms of mitigation, trying to solve the climate change problem through reducing the emissions. This is a commitment by developed countries, and we need also support for adaptation to address the existing and the projected climate change.
Thank you, Doctor. We'll be coming towards some of these issues during our discussion this morning. David, would like to add to that also in terms of how climate change also affects post-harvest losses.
Certainly. As the doctor duly noted, climate change is going to aggravate every one of the complications or debilitations that we see in the agribusiness value chains. And from our perspective, from Bloomberg Grain and Bloomberg Capital Partners, which is the holding company's perspective, post-harvest losses is the key issue that we must ameliorate if we are going to solve global food insecurity. That's due to the fact that right now estimates, and it's tough to nail down an exact figure, but in many of the emerging markets, specifically in sub-Saharan Africa, you see about a 50% post-harvest loss rate, especially among the subsistence farmers. And with global climate change and the issue of decreased yields that are associated with that, there will be a compounding effect on the economies and livelihoods of these individuals. Now, today, as we see it, yields are actually in a state of somewhat steady increase. Working with companies like DuPont, Pioneer, Monsanto, et cetera, high-yield seeds have been distributed to a large degree in many of these areas. But the problem of post-harvest losses still remains. And the problem there lies in the fact that we are unable to actually create systems, markets, and warehousing available to the small farmer in decentralized locations that enable one to get that product from the field into the warehouse, into safe storage. Now, when a farmer's unable to do that, they lose that crop, they lose their share of their profit. And that is really just discouraging to a family and to their children. And what I feel is incredibly important, especially as climate change really magnifies the issues of food insecurity, is that we keep that enthusiasm amongst young people within farming, within that industry, and create some more innovation rather than simply flooding the urban centers, creating more population growth into some of these urban centers, which honestly creates disproportionate economies of scale when you look at many of these countries, especially in sub-Saharan Africa. What we're trying to do in our role as a firm that provides food safety and security equipment when it comes to climate change and trying to counteract those issues is, number one, when we look at the energy dependence of our systems, we try to ensure that we have off-grid power supplies that are sustainable. With our warehousing, for example, we can attach, obviously, solar systems, solar panels, which are being widely dispersed all across Africa. But we even have the ability to attach wind turbines in some of the areas that can utilize that, working in Kazakhstan, areas of high-intensity wind flow. And we also look to, I think it's an imperative of any company involved in this industry to look to other ways that they can become more sustainable, whether it be in the design of their infrastructure. And so in our case with our warehousing, we try to really become leaders in efficiency of steel use and things of that nature. So we all have a role to play in this space. And I think as generations move forward, everyone that's involved in agriculture in their ethos will, I guess, look towards sustainability as a way to integrate the positives of agriculture with the positives of long-term profit.
Sanjay?
Yeah. Since last 2 days, we have been hearing about a lot of information which have really made us very, very grim and pessimistic about the attitude, and I agree with every bit of word that has been spoken. But I'm also an optimist, and I have some very objective reasons for that. I would like to list few of those, which I feel that although we should panic because of the situation, but we need not panic because there are some signals which are emerging. For example, on the regulatory side, in Africa, the governments like Nigeria, they banned rice imports. That means $3 billion out of the total $30 billion worth of imports has been put on a question mark just in one country. And it would directly mean that although some rice will come from here and there, but it would also mean that it will be grown more in Nigeria, and also it will be processed more. So the next thing which will be on the block would be wheat. Similarly, if you look at some of the signals which have come from India, that country is sitting on the grain reserves which are required for the next 3 years. So there have been a continuous effort to boost the cereal production, and now they are sitting on a very, very record production, and every warehouse is full. They don't have warehouses to store the kind of grain that they are having. Brazil is uprooting citrus because they feel that there's not enough citrus demand in the world. So that's the kind of signals which are coming on for some commodities, not for all. Of course, there is a nutrient deficiency, especially the protein deficiency, especially pulses or edible oils. So definitely those are the grim areas. So I feel that there are more such signals which will continue to emanate, and solutions will come forward. India signed a land-related bill, so which made it a lot more saner how to identify the land for the industrial uses and which land to identify for the industrial uses. And similarly in Africa, the debate is almost culminating into a realization that we have so much of land and we need to give it out to others, especially to the large commercialized farmers. That means that there is a consensus which is emerging that yes, foreigners will come and till the land. So when this equity which is coming into Africa, since last 10 years, so much money has gone in and more is coming, it will bring fruits. CAADP started about 10 years ago. It meant that 10% of the GDP of the budget of the countries will be put in for agriculture, and there are about 10-15 African countries who have been consistently putting 10% of their budget into the agriculture. So the results are about to come out and more will join in. I feel that Africa will rise in production. First, it will set its own house in order. The $30-40 billion worth of imports will be controlled. I wouldn't say that it will go down, but at least the growth at which it has been going up, it will be arrested, and slowly for some commodities, Africa will feed the rest of the world, especially Middle East.
Dr. Saad? Should be on.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Thank you, Dr. Ashraf. As the first time to speak, please allow me to thank the organizers really for inviting me to speak to you today. I'd like also to congratulate really Tina for the well-arranged really conference. And really, in the meantime, please allow me to say that I'm really very frustrated that we are in the GCC in Dubai, while we consider ourselves our net food importer countries, and I can see only 3 people from the GCC countries. Unfortunately, this is something traditional, and we hope that we can solve it in the future. Regarding really Africa issue, from my point of view, that the solution that we have to complement each other. I'll take Saudi Arabia as example of the, let me say, GCC specifically, and Africa in general. We lack really the natural resources to produce what we need as strategic food commodities in the GCC. The fertile land is not there. We have shortage of water, and even the labor is not really available in the GCC region. What we have financial capabilities, yes, we do. We have experience, specifically the private sector in agriculture. They have very good experience from the last, really, let me say, period in what we call it the Green Revolution in Saudi Arabia. And also, we have the modern technology to produce. Africa in general, as we all know, they have the natural resources. They have the land, they have the water, labor. Yes, we have to admit that they lack the financial capabilities. And unfortunately, there is what we call it, and what has been mentioned yesterday and today, political instability, which really gave the private sector specifically indicator that the risk of investment in Africa is so high. So what to do? From my point of view, as director of King Abdullah Initiative for Agricultural Investment Abroad, we have to take the risk. We have to take the risk, both of us, the public and the private sector. The objective of this initiative is to contribute in food security locally, regionally, and indirectly globally. How can we do that? When the government decided really to encourage the private sector in Saudi Arabia to invest abroad, and specifically in Africa, South Asia, we as government, we took the risk to identify what are the countries that have natural resources, and it's very important, and willing to host the Saudi agricultural investment. Since 2009 until now, we identified 31 countries, not only in Africa, but in all 5 continents. Yes, maybe 50% in Africa, and more of that in Asia, Europe, Latin America, and even in Australia. And the door really is still open in King Abdullah Initiative for any country that has natural resources and willing to host the Saudi agricultural investment. We have to take the risk. But believe me, and from the previous experience in Africa specifically, if the agricultural investment in any country, even the poor country, and the people and the government realize that these projects is benefiting them, believe me, the risk will be minimized more and more. Right now, we have projects in Sudan, in Egypt, in Ethiopia, in Mauritania. In the beginning, we were thinking how to sign some sort of investment protection treaty or agreements. But believe me, nowadays, the community surrounding these projects are the ones who are protecting these projects. Why? They felt that they have jobs working in these projects. More than 90 to 95% people from the local community surrounding this project are working in this project. They felt that this project contributed to the food security in the local community and in the country in general. They realized really that the infrastructure surrounding them has been developed. They have schools, they have clinics, they have what they need exactly. So I have to summarize that we have to complement each other and we have to take the risk together, public and private sector in both hosting countries and, let me say, the investing countries. Saudi Arabia in general, as representing by King Abdullah Initiative, is willing to cooperate also with those who have financial capabilities, not only in the GCC, in other countries, those who have agricultural experience, and to invest in third world, for example, in Africa. So we can complement each other and hopefully that we can contribute in eradication poor in the world to meet the objective of the United Nations.
So I'd just like to take that a little bit forward, Dr. Saad. Does the King Abdullah Initiative also help these farmers increase the yields? And does it also provide some element of support so they actually become self-sufficient in some ways?
To be honest, we are talking about investment, but to make it clear, who is going to invest in Africa? It's not the government of Saudi Arabia. It's the private sector. But the government will encourage and support the private sector to invest in Africa or in any other countries. It's not a charity. We have to know that. The private sector is wise and aggressive. We all know that. But when the government stand and support the private sector, from Saudi Arabia right now, the government support the private sector by giving them loans to invest. This is very important. The government will provide some support for the infrastructure surrounding the project, either by donation or loans or whatever. The community in Africa, in Sudan, in Egypt, and in other countries, not really being as individuals just to stay in his farm and to develop his farm. These people really join these projects. They work in these projects. They have been trained, and they get payment. If your income increases, you can do a lot. You can secure food for you and your family, and you can gain experience, and you can even later on contribute in your own farm and develop it. So the support really is not some sort of charity. The charity has different channels, and Saudi Arabia is the main leader in this issue. But really the agricultural investment abroad is some sort of public-private partnership supported really by the government and under the umbrella of the cooperation between the two countries. Yes, we need diplomatic, we need politics sometimes, but it's some sort to facilitate the mission of the private sector, Doctor.
Thank you, Dr. Saad. I know that David and his company have been quite active in terms of investments in the agribusiness in Africa. Can you just tell us a little bit more about this and also how you help the African farmers? Sure.
So I'd like to echo those comments about the necessity for there to be public-private partnerships in any investment in agribusiness in Africa. And what we've seen as a firm is we've seen a trend towards governments establishing offices of PPP within their political infrastructure to facilitate groups like private investors to enter into this space and make it more profitable. The other trend that we've seen is really a focus on agriculture, which is why we're all here today. I am an optimist when it comes to agriculture in Africa. I believe Africa will become the breadbasket of the world. I think that's primarily for 2 or 3 reasons. Number one, Obviously, the climate conditions and the amount of arable land available to us as a population within this globe to take advantage of what we have in terms of productivity potential in Africa. The second thing I see is a large population involved and invested in Africa. You know, about 75% of the population in many of sub-Saharan countries actually derives their living from agriculture. Granted, this is now subsistence farming that we see most of the time. So the value that we think we can bring as investors, as movers of capital, and as really technology experts is the ability to transition subsistence farming into really productive, profitable farming. And in our opinion, as a firm, and specifically as our Bloomberg Grain Company mission, I guess, relates, we focus on that area of post-harvest losses, as I've mentioned before. There is a huge potential to work with governments to implement systems that enable farmers to actually create new markets. And one good example that I'll give you is what's going on in Ghana right now, where they're actually developing the first commodities exchange for the country. And these commodities exchanges do a couple things for farmers. First and foremost, they create an additional market which is readily accessible. They also create an area of an amalgamation so that other fledgling companies who need product and need product in large quantities can actually turn to African countries for supply. And then the last thing it does is it creates a great deal of market information that's available to farmers so they're educated about what the prices are for each of the commodities that they're looking to invest in when they actually go and plant their seed. And this is critical because it finally takes some of the control back to the farmer when it comes to what they can do with their product post-harvest. And that's exciting for farmers, I think, whereas beforehand, they may have been relegated to simply succumbing to the demands of what's called the mama trader who passes by the farm once per harvest season and literally give up all their crop to the one marketer who passes by at a really, I guess, low price. So we see the development of commodities exchanges, number one, as being something that is good for the community, but also profitable in terms of improving or modernizing the agricultural value chains. The other thing that governments are doing, and I think this is another private sector, public sector initiative, is to create greater stockpiles for local governments when it comes to grain specifically. And that's a requirement for governments who are looking to really mitigate against some of the political tensions that arise out of food insecurity. And there's a need, I think, for African countries to look domestically to create those stockpiles. And there's generally a trend that we see in countries like Nigeria and countries like the DRC, in countries like Senegal, in which they're creating these programs, these strategic stockpiles, in which they mop up some of the excess supply that's available in country and actually store it for long periods of time to protect against those issues of famine, which we think will only increase as we have issues related to climate change emerge. So there's a lot of opportunity for investors to play in that space. There's also opportunity to play, I think, upstream and downstream from the issue or from the point of post-harvest. Our company is primarily interested actually in processing projects. And when I say processing, that starts off really with right off the field, cleaning, screening, and drying the product, which isn't done in a very effective way right now in many of the countries that we engage in. But then even further downstream, you have a lot of opportunity to create higher value products domestically. And this is a major priority of many of the governments that we encounter, to keep some of that value added profit domestic. And there are a number of firms, and it's not just Bloomberg Capital Partners, but huge consortiums investing in this space, investing in packaging facilities, investing in processing facilities, creating juices, packaging and cleaning fruits and vegetables for export into the international markets. And this is really what I think is the vision or the future of agriculture in Africa.
Thank you. Sanjay, you've done a lot of work in terms of advising on agribusiness for investment. Can you share some of your experience in this aspect?
My experience on the ground has been that as on date, the businesses in Africa are not able to compete. They are not able to compete because of various reasons, and the biggest of them is power. There's no power. So when you have no power, power is coming for 4 hours a day in the interiors of Nigeria. That means you have to put a diesel power. So diesel power in that part of the world is very expensive. And when it is expensive, it makes you absolutely price incompetitive. Second thing which makes you incompetitive is the transportation. So from the hinterlands of any of these countries, when you move the goods by road, because there are no rail, by the time it touches the port, you have lost the battle. So it has already become so expensive that whichever destination you want to take it, it is virtually impossible because the price is already in the origination itself is more. So that means that the best play that you have is the import substitution. So every country has to look at that what is that you are short in. For example, in some countries like Mozambique or Zimbabwe, even South Africa or Zambia, most of these countries are deficient on edible oils. So before they become the food factory for the world, they should first get their own situation sorted. Something like palm oil, which started from Nigeria, and the Asian countries went on to become the largest producer. So the fact is that it can be grown as efficiently in Nigeria, and Nigeria has the money, Nigeria has the land, it has got the best quality land, it has water, it has people, it has manpower, everything it is there. But the production is still not coming out. So it can work on those import substitution priorities first. For example, chickpeas. Now, chickpeas traditionally Turkey has been supplying, but their costs are also going up because they are becoming more European, and probably Ethiopia can step in. But when you go to a country like India and you say that, would you like to buy from Ethiopia? They say, no, we would like to buy from Kenya. Why? Because the admixture is more in chickpeas. That means just because they could not sieve and pack properly, they are losing out on the market, whereas their product is not inferior. So if they were as professional as some of the entrepreneurs in Kenya, probably they would have got the price. And look at the opportunity there. 85% of their production is in-house. So that means they are not dependent on the rest of the world. Only 15% they are exporting. And if you get a situation like this, that your own country requires a product, and also the rest of the world also requires this, it's a win-win situation, because sometimes your country will be an opportunity and sometimes export will be an opportunity. That means you will never lose out. Whereas in most agricultural commodities, after 4 or 5 years, there is a cycle and you lose out. Either there is a glut somewhere or there is a scarcity somewhere and you lose out on one of these two opportunities. Another things which I feel, which is actually laughable, is the non-tariff barriers. All the countries on the border, those who are near the sea, they think that God has given them the right to block the supplies to the hinterlands. So countries like Rwanda, Burundi, or even Niger, they're crying. Even Uganda, they say that just because we are in the hinterland, that by the time the produce reaches their port, their consumption pattern is so expensive. So that is why this mineral, this nutrient insecurity, because people are not buying. It's not that they don't have buying power, but that buying power is going into something unnecessary things. Maybe they are buying a SIM card, maybe they are buying some other unnecessary items, and they are not buying milk for their children. So that is why the nutrient insecurity is coming, because the cost of food is so expensive. And whereas wherever the people can actually pay, like for example, the middle class in India can pay, the food is cheap. Even now, it's cheap. There are some commodities where you have glut-like situation, where farmers will come and throw their tomatoes on the street, that we are not getting good prices for that. So I think that most of these businesses in Africa are naturally in a position not to compete. And the government can play a role to only to an extent. Private sector can play a role to only to an extent. I think markets like GCC can really play a good role, because what Saudi Arabia has done is really commendable. First, they went on to demonstrate the world that we can also grow. Then they said, okay, we have learned that these are the things we should be growing and these are the things we should not be growing. And for this, we are willing to give a helping hand. This is wonderful. It's like a solution coming out of the book, that such nice things are about to happen. So if we have a hand holding where the customer is saying, okay, you come, stand up, and I will support you, I'm the market, and I also give you money. So that then one by one, not the countries, the companies will become more competitive. And there are companies like, I can see Olam is sitting here, ETG is there, my previous company, and these companies have demonstrated that yes, some supply chains are competitive, whether it is cashew, cocoa, or whatever traditional commodities, or also the new ones. All over Africa, rice is a short. So rice needs to be there. So that means everybody can grow rice, and to some extent they can have some preferences for their local rice, and they can process their local mangoes, at least for their own country. If they can't export mango pulp, they can actually do a little bit of import substitution on that. Why is it that these countries are importing mango pulp, orange concentrate, or pineapple concentrate from rest of the world? They should simply ban it. They should, you have to drink this one only, which is grown in your own country. And if it is not the proper quality, you bring the science and budwood from countries like India. For example, India has the best Alfonso mango. So we have supported an initiative in Malawi by the name of Malawi Mangoes. It is an initiative by Britishers, somebody who sold his apartment, and he said that, okay, I'll get this right, and brought his knowledge of private equity, set up a unit there, and we helped them to bring the budwood from India, bring it from the southern part of India, take it to the port of Mumbai, lift it, it goes to the Nairobi airport. From Nairobi airport, it changes an aircraft with the help of Kenya Airways. It goes to Lilongwe, and then from there, another 200 kilometers goes there. Within 5 days, those buds actually do not survive after 5 days. So it has to be grafted within those 4 or 5 days of supply chain. And they have put it up in such a way, although the survival rate is 40%, 50%, or sometimes 60%. But even then, after 2 years or 3 years, you would find Alfonso mango growing in those areas, which can be processed, which can be brought by air to this part of the world. Now, India has a different season of mango, and these countries have a different season of mango. So when GCC countries cannot get from India, probably they can get from there. So these are some of the smart things which are possible, doable, which one by one these countries are, these companies are bringing, and they are lifting some of the efficiencies. But some of the inefficiencies which are at the port are there. They will take their own time. Even countries are also not able to solve it, because after all, many of these countries are poor countries. So they have their own priorities of infrastructure development. So slowly they will come up. India came up because it gave subsidies to the farmers. So these countries also need to give subsidies to the farmer. The drip irrigation in India costs $500. In Africa, it's called $1,000. In India, you can get a loan which is at a lower cost. In Africa, the loan is at 25%. So that means, because their currencies are more fragile, that is why the banks put a kind of a penal, you can say, buffer for themselves, and this makes the whole thing uncompetitive. And slowly, some of these companies are able to put up a winning supply chain, and things will become better and better with every passing day.
Thank you. Dr. Bilkis, decreased water availability limits agricultural potential and leads to competition between water usage in agriculture, industrial use, and for human consumption. The Nile Basin, which is a very good example, is spread over 10 different countries that are fraught with poverty and water allocation issues that may increase instability and conflict in the future. Of course, this situation needs to be avoided, but to what extent can this also increase the food insecurity aspect? And what can be done?
Yeah, of course, water scarcity is one of the major problems that is projected to take place under climate change. And water scarcity will not only be a result of decreased rainfall, but it is also a result of rising temperature and increased evaporation. And for the Nile Basin, a number of studies have been conducted. One of them is done by Conway, and it tried to simulate the impact of climate change on the River Nile, and the impact of doubling the carbon dioxide. A number of scenarios were generated. It gives different scope of results, from a slightly increase to much decrease in the amount of water in the Nile. And in addition to the impact that I mentioned of increasing evaporation, this will definitely create problems, especially as the Nile is shared by 10 countries. And I think the Nile Basin Initiative has also taken climate change into consideration with the aim of getting a shared vision on managing the water and sharing the benefits. There is a need, of course, to better monitor the Nile flow. There is a need to share information across the countries, more collaboration in developing projects around the Nile, and to put the issue of benefit sharing into practical implementation. That is, not necessarily every country should start fighting about its share. Rather, they should think of how to make maximum benefit of the water without the competition over the amount to be taken by each country. I think this is very important. So close cooperation among the Nile basin countries is very important, because otherwise, with these climate change scenarios, many problems can be created if these issues are not taken into consideration. Kenya, for example, is going to face declining water resources, because currently the mountainous ice is shrinking, and it is this water coming from the mountain that feeds into the river flow, and the impact is currently being felt. So they will definitely need more water from the Nile. Uganda is also experiencing some declining in rainfall. So the other countries, the tropical part of the Nile, which previously has not been real actors and users of the Nile water, now will come into the picture. It's becoming more sensitive, of course.
Thank you. David, would like to add to that?
Sure. Funny enough, I actually just came from Cairo 4 hours ago. I was meeting with the Minister of Agriculture, the head of the Agricultural Development Bank, and the head of farmers' cooperatives there. And this subject came up, especially sort of with the recent debate around the flow of the Nile and extraction of water sort of closer to the source. And from our perspective, and our trip was focused around trying to help cooperatives hold on to some of their crops, some of the wheat harvest that's coming up for a little bit longer than they have in the past. But from our perspective, and I think from the ministry's perspective, things are not going to get easier when it comes to production around the Nile. So there's going to be a need for huge investments in drip irrigation and improving efficiency of water usage. But it's also becoming increasingly important to take advantage of the crop that is actually produced at this time. So right now what's going on, when you look at some of the wheat harvest, for example, and Egypt is the number one consumer of wheat, number one importer of wheat in the world. You see quite a bit of wheat production in Egypt, but you see none of that actually getting to the table of the consumer. Because right now the storage conditions and the storage environment is quite outdated. In fact, it's almost open pile across a flat field, and birds, rodents, insects are actually getting at that product and not allowing it to flow to the Egyptian holding company for silos and storage or get into that Baladi bread program, which is the bread of life. And we have a situation which is not only affecting the economy and affecting the livelihoods of families, but also creating political instability. And if you look at some of the political issues that have occurred in Egypt specifically, and you look at the overthrow of the Mubarak regime, you come to understand, if you do some digging, that that revolution or that revolt was not as much precipitated by social issues, by issues that perhaps were characterized in the media as issues of, I guess, rights and privileges to publicity, to speaking one's mind, etc. But at the end of the day, people went to the streets because there was an increase in bread prices. And this is something that we've seen in a number of countries, actually, over the past decade or so, where food insecurity is inciting revolt. And so governments are making it a priority for their countries to actually invest in agriculture. And that's one of the reasons why we're so optimistic about the possibility for change in Africa. Shifting to another country which I think has done a relatively good job of this, or at least creating a much larger focus, and it's been mentioned on this panel multiple times, but that's the country of Nigeria. Nigeria, to give you a sense, the country sponsors an economic summit every year. For the past 2 years, I believe, the focus has been agribusiness in Nigeria. And this is a summit for all of the top corporations all across Nigeria, and you would think that the focus would be on oil, or would be on some of those other resources which we liken or associate with that country. But really, the focus is now on agriculture as a business, and that is the Minister of Agriculture's motto there, Minister Adesina, who is, I think, a pioneer in the area, actually just won Forbes Africa's Person of the Year. And he set forth a vision to really commercialize farming, to stop the stigma of farming and agriculture being a non-for-profit foundation, and creating private sector incentives to really expedite the modernization of these agricultural value chains. And we see that happening across a number of levels. We see that happening in the agricultural inputs industry, where Dangote is now investing massive amounts of money in fertilizer production. We see that in some of the high-yield, high-efficiency seeds that are being distributed all across the country through their GSE program. And actually, the minister, in his capacity, has also tried to tackle the issue of post-harvest losses by working with companies like AFEX, Africa Exchange Holdings, to establish a warehouse receipt system and a commodities exchange, or a fledgling commodities exchange, working with companies like Bloomberg Grain to install one of the largest cold chain warehousing infrastructure projects on the continent. And then working with traders to help traders become more profitable, especially some of the smaller scale local traders who have the potential to really realize, I think, profits in the range of about 100, 200% within a farming cycle. There's a real opportunity in Africa to take advantage of the point of sale, or the cost of, I guess, the price that one can ascertain at the point of harvest into the lean season. When you look at dry grains, you see with locational and timing arbitrage increases of about 100%. produce, it's 200, 300, 400% sometimes. So there is commercial viability for one to get into this sector. And I think that we're slowly but surely creating some great case studies for others to piggyback on and create real change within agriculture by investing more money, investing more capital, and really developing some of these projects.
Thank you, David. I've just got 2 minutes left because I've been told that it's going to be lunchtime soon. But I really want to get Sanjay and Dr. Saad's views. But just 1 minute each, please. Right?
You can start. I think everybody is waiting for the lunch, so I will
So you have 60 seconds.
I would say that things are really looking up, and we are also investing. So is the rest of the world in Africa, and the youth in Africa is really taking it up very seriously. So things are better ahead.
Dr. Saad, please have the last word.
Thank you so
Or
much.
sentence.
In fact, really very short messages. One, to those who have financial capabilities, even if you have cash money, maybe the food commodity is not available in the world market. So you have to invest, you have to contribute in food commodity availability in the world market. For those countries who lack the financial capabilities and they have the natural resources, you have to facilitate, encourage the private sector to invest in your country. You will benefit and they will benefit, and it's going to be a win-win situation. Thank you.
Thank you. It now leaves me to thank our panelists who have been very patient, because this was supposed to be a 45-minute session, and it turned out to be 1 hour, 5 minutes. It's amazing, and I'm sure I could go on for much longer, but I'm sure all of you are very hungry. So it leaves me to thank Dr. Bilkis, David, Sanjay, and Dr. Saad. Thank you very, very much. We'll come back after lunch.